Learning to pierce. That's why you're here, I hear. What we're going to talk about today is three major things. We're going to talk about taper pins. Or guide pins, sometimes they're called. Needles, the different types, and needle receiving tubes. Three pieces of equipment that you'll use on pretty much every piercing you do. Coming up next on Body Piercing Basics, episode number 109. So you might want to stick around. For those who are new to the channel, my name is DaVo. I'm a professional body piercer and have been since 1994. I own and I operate the Axiom Body Piercing Studio located right here in Des Moines, Iowa, inside Skin Kitchen Tattoo. Which means when I talk to you about these things, I talk to you a level of expertise that comes from being in the body piercing industry for well over 26 years. Been here a while. Learning to pierce, part 3. Basically, I should explain first off and foremost, this is more about giving you some basic knowledge that you can build on during an apprenticeship. This is no way, shape, or form a way to have you learn how to pierce. Sorry, you can't do that by watching videos. You really do need to have that hands-on interaction and etc. with an experienced piercer to learn what you're doing. Now, the rest of you that aren't learning to pierce, why are you here? You may be asking yourself, I don't know. Maybe you aren't. If you're passionate about piercing, if you've ever wondered about how we do things or why we do things certain ways or what we use, you're going to learn a little bit today about that. So before we get too far into this, if you like the video, find it educational, find it informative, find it anything useful whatsoever, please give us a thumbs up. Let us know that you liked it. If you'd like to see more of them, please subscribe, hit that notification bell so that you're notified absolutely every time we post something. So let's start off with taper pins. Taper pins are, or guide pins they're often called, are generally long pieces of metal. One side is usually a couple gauges smaller than the other side. In other words, they taper, they expand. These were primarily developed initially for stretching piercings or reinserting jewelry into piercings that had not had jewelry in it for a while. Usually, like one side, for example, if you're looking at like a, let's say a 16 gauge taper, one side's going to be close to 20, 22 gauge. The other side is going to be right around 16, maybe a little bit bigger. Now, there is mainly 3 different types of taper pins that you're going to come across. The first type, they're called concave sometimes. These are the old style. They have a back that has an indentation or concave that was designed for the jewelry to set in while it was inserted. This worked really well with externally threaded jewelry. It worked really well with rings that had that rounded edge. It made it easy to insert that jewelry. Actually, like I said, these were used mainly for stretching piercings or inserting jewelry into piercings that have been abandoned or left empty for a while. Slowly over time, though, as the piercing industry developed and internally threaded, especially in threadless jewelry, became a big factor or a big part of it, it changed how these are used. Usually the way that one method that's used is you pierce, like let's say a labret piercing or a Medusa, for example, or a beauty mark. When you do it, you inject the needle from the outside inward. Well, once you have that in there, how do you get this thing that has a flat back on it back out through the piercing? The way to do this was to push the needle out with the taper pin, hook the jewelry into the thin end of the taper pin, and then push it back through and then tighten on the ball or whatever. This worked pretty well, except it did create a few problems. There was usually additional trauma because it's so thin that there was kind of a speed bump there where the jewelry began. That could cause problems. I still use it from time to time depending on the piercing, what type of jewelry I'm using, etc. However, things have advanced and things are better now, and there's better options. The first one would be threaded taper pins. Basically, these are just like any other taper pin, except at the end of it, it has a piece of threading. The threading then threads into the internally threaded jewelry. So basically, in essence, if you're doing little braids like we were talking about, or a beauty mark, you pierce it, you push with the threading in, you push the needle out, you thread on the jewelry, and then push it back through. there's a more smooth transfer, less trauma to the piercing, less problems, and less chance of that jewelry separating from the receiving or from the taper bin, and then you having to dig around and try to figure out where that second hole is, which nobody wants to do, and nobody wants to have that done to them. Also, it's used as an easy way to just transfer jewelry in. The last one is threadless, or pins. Are basically what this is a taper pin just like any other. Instead of having threading off the end or being concave, it has a little piece of threading that is the size of the interior hole or hollow area of any threadless piece of jewelry. So you basically use it exactly the same way, but instead of threading it, you just push that pin into the jewelry and use that to guide it out. This makes it a lot easier to do oral piercings, ear piercings, all kinds of things where you're working in tight areas and it's very difficult to thread on jewelry and etc. And threadless has its advantages or disadvantages. In a future video, I plan on going through all the different types of jewelry enclosures. Future. We'll get to it. Now let's move on to needles. There's primarily 5 different types of needles. There's the standard piercing needles. Now, how that evolved eventually or from is, at least when I started piercing, and I'm sure this wasn't anything new when I was around, is we would buy vet needles and then cut off the hub and polish the end so that there wasn't any burrs. This developed into actual hypodermic needles being purchased without the hub. Basically, it is a lance tip. Usually has like kind of a triangular shape to it. And the way these cut is they cut downward. So in some cases, as the needle goes through, instead of going through like this, it will go kind of through like that, just basically because of the shape of it. A common misconception is that somehow these needles core out the tissue. The reality is all it does is make a crescent moon incision that is large enough for the jewelry to fit into. So basically, you're not taking anybody's body stuff. Fluids, yes, they're going to contaminate it. Maybe a little bit of physical, skin or whatever, but tissue, I guess, would be the best way of putting that. But you're not biopsying them in any way, shape, or form. There is not going to be inside that needle a bunch of flesh. The main disadvantage to standard piercing needles is the traveling. The other issue is sometimes it's not big enough to allow enough space for the jewelry. The next type are called curved piercing needles. Now, the normal needles are straight. Curved needles are designed to get into certain areas a little bit easier. I personally do not like them, mainly because I don't feel like I have the same amount of control. It's easier to lose control, in my opinion. People that are experienced with them and have had good luck and success with them can use those things like crazy. It's amazing to watch how quickly they can do it and how it doesn't take extra tools to do piercings like DaVo piercings in tight areas. You don't need that needle receiving tube because that jewelry or the needle just goes straight out of the ear. The same thing with DaVo piercing or rook piercings. Now, the piercing is slightly different because of the angle, but for the most part, that initial piercing is going to be the same shape. Depending on how fat the tissue is, I guess if you put it through a long area, it would possibly, I guess, be curved, sort of. The next kind, I'm going to probably mispronounce. They're chamfers or chamfer needles. These are needles that have a rounded cutting surface. They are like a dermal punch. They are not lanced. They are very sharp, and they do, in fact, take a biopsy. They do take a piece of flesh. These have come into popularity for one main reason, and one of the things I should have talked about when I was talking about standard piercing needles is that often it can separate the tissue, especially in cartilage piercings. It can cause some issues. So the theory is with these style, you're just basically going in, you're not adding as much trauma, and you're not separating that tissue. The other advantage to it is once you go in, you're going to go in straight. You're not going to have the travel that you have with standard piercing needles. And the curved ones do that too. The disadvantage is it's a lot more intrusive. You are taking out a piece of somebody's body. If you're doing this in cartilage, that cartilage will never grow back again. The technique is different. The needle has to be spun as it's going through. It can cause a little bit more trauma. I've I've seen mixed results on both. Be honest, I've not used this needle or this style of needle more than a couple of times. I don't have a lot of expertise on them, but that's been my impression through the research that I've done so far. Now I'll probably mispronounce this too. It's Cannula Needles. I want to say cannoli. Why do I don't know. Cannula. Basically what they are, and they're really primarily used in Europe. That was how the piercing industry developed over there. They are a needle with a plastic sleeve that's around it, or a piece of tubing. So basically when you do the piercing, you push through the needle, the tubing follows with it, you remove the needle, cut off the end, and you have this piece of tubing sitting inside the piercing. Then you use that to insert the jewelry. So it limits the possibility of the needle separating from the jewelry, which makes it a little bit more proficient from that standpoint. I have never really messed with it, never really had a cause to. I don't know much about it beyond what I've been told and what research I've done on them. Last one isn't really a needle. It's a dermal punch. This is a medical tool that is designed for biopsies, usually used by dermatologists. This, like the Chamfer Needles, is cylinder in shape and basically is spun as it goes through. It acts basically the same way. The biggest difference is dermal punches can come in extremely large sizes. When you see somebody that has like a conch piercing that's 00, it's because it was done with a dermal punch. The other main use of these is doing dermal implants and subdermal implants, because you can biopsy that area and then put the jewelry in. It's a much cleaner operation than try to cut it with a hypodermic needle or, using any of the other things that are out there and available. It has its usage. I don't like them. It seems very intrusive. It seems like you're permanently changing somebody, especially when it comes to large lobe stretched ears. I think that you should earn them by slowly stretching them the way that everyone before everybody decided to use these was doing them. It's just a shortcut. It's not really needed. You're going to learn less about your body and kind of less of that experience. Before we get on to the last thing, needle receiving tubes, I want to tell you that we have a merch store. We have various different t-shirts, various different designs, various different products, from phone cases, tote bags, beach towels, throw pillows, and just about anything you can possibly imagine. Check it out. Links in the description. There's also one of those merch bars down below. Needle receiving tubes come in various different sizes. For those that are not aware of what it is a hollow tube that's designed to basically, in essence, catch needles. It was originally developed to do piercings in genitals, especially the Prince Albert piercing. It was most widely used for that. In this day and age, it's used for a lot of piercings. It's either used as a way to support the tissue during the process, like on septum piercings, Prince Albert's, vertical clitoral hood piercings. But in a lot of areas, it is used as a way to safely guide the sharp edge of the needle out of the area without causing additional damage. For example, you do a daith piercing. You have the sharp object sitting there right at the entrance into your ear canal. You would take a taper pin, set it in there, put the needle inside the taper pin, and you could safely move it and push the needle out of the way. Now, these come in various different gauges and widths. Of course, just like the gauging system with jewelry and everything else, the smaller the number, the wider or thicker that hole's going to be. Some cases, really large ones are helpful in areas where it's difficult to determine where that tube's at or see both sides of the piercing. For example, nostril piercings. The disadvantage of the really large, wide ones is that it doesn't support the tissue as easily, and it can affect how that needle cuts through the tissue, making it more painful and slower. There's really only, 4 types if you consider material, and it's all material. There is stainless steel, which is probably the most common, implant grade usually. Titanium, also implant grade. Glass ones, which are kind of helpful in certain piercings because you can exactly see when that needle goes through there. And the disposable style, usually made out of acrylic. And some of them are clear, but most of them have kind of a opaque or chalky or frosted look to it. Needle receiving tubes are a tool that you will use a lot, especially with ear work. It's impossible to do certain piercings without them. You should get used to using them and learning how to line them up properly. That's all I have to say about that. If you have any questions or have things to add, or maybe I skipped over something, or you want to make fun of the way that I pronounce these names that I don't use every day, feel free to leave a comment. We love comments. I try to answer them when I have time. So please do so. Till next time, here's hoping all your piercings heal with ease and without a single issue. And if you're in the Des Moines, Iowa area, I hope to see you for your body piercing needs in the future. Have a good day, everybody. Take care. Take care of one another and stay healthy. Click on one of these, and we'll see you in the next video.